The year was 1598, and Osaka Castle towered over the crowded arena like a silent judge watching the fate of every warrior who stepped beneath its shadow. On that day, the annual tournament held before the emperor drew more than 3,000 spectators, samurai, nobles, merchants, travelers, all hungry for the thrill of combat and the spectacle of honor being won or shattered in a single heartbeat. Among the competitors stood Ryota, a 22-year-old prodigy whose name had become synonymous with discipline, precision, and unbroken victory. He was the pride of his dojo, the son every master wished they had trained, the warrior every village boy dreamed of becoming. He had won 17 consecutive duels without a single misstep, each triumph polishing the legend people built around him. As he walked into the arena that morning, his back straight, expression calm, and movements controlled, the crowd whispered his name with the confidence of those certain they were witnessing the rise of a future master. Ryota himself believed it too, or at least, he believed he was supposed to believe it. But standing across from him was a man who looked nothing like someone destined to challenge a prodigy. A nameless ronin, clothes worn from travel, posture relaxed to the point of carelessness, eyes unbothered by the weight of the crowd. He had no formal training, no reputation worth mentioning, no lineage to impress the emperor. He carried his wooden sword in one hand as if it were merely a walking stick. And yet something about him, something subtle, something unspoken, felt dangerously alive. Ryota ignored that feeling, telling himself it was simply arrogance or the pressure of performing before the emperor. He had trained for this. He had been molded for this. He was prepared, or so he thought. The official raised his hand to signal the duel's beginning. The world seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Ryota steadied his stance, centered his spirit, waited for the perfect moment to unleash the technique he had practiced 10,000 times. But the moment never came. Instead, what arrived was an abrupt and terrifying emptiness, a sudden blankness inside his mind, like every memory, every instinct, every muscle pattern had vanished in an instant. His body refused to move. His grip loosened. His breath stalled. And before he could understand what was happening, the ronin was already upon him. A wooden sword cracked across Ryota's face, once, twice, then a third time, each strike delivered with effortless confidence, each one a reminder that the body follows the mind, and the mind follows what has been practiced. Ryota staggered, unable even to lift his weapon. The duel was over before he had a chance to begin. 8 seconds. That was all it took for the undefeated prodigy to crumble before a man no one had ever heard of. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar could have been. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, the laughter hidden behind polite sleeves. The emperor looked away. Ryota's master closed his eyes. Those who once praised him now whispered theories, fatigue, arrogance, a curse, divine judgment. But Ryota heard none of it clearly. All he could hear was the hollow echo inside his own chest, the sudden realization that everything he had believed himself to be, warrior, prodigy, rising legend, had shattered the moment pressure demanded truth instead of performance. And as he left the arena, bleeding and humiliated, one thought repeated inside him like a quiet, merciless blade, I don't know who I am anymore. For days after the humiliation, Ryota wandered through Osaka like a ghost trapped inside his own body. The streets were loud with merchants shouting prices, children laughing, monks chanting, yet none of it reached him. People recognized him, of course, they always did, but now their eyes held something new. Pity. Disappointment. Curiosity sharpened into judgment. Some whispered that the prodigy had finally cracked under pressure. Others claimed the ronin had used forbidden techniques. A few even insisted the duel had been staged to teach the young boastful warrior a lesson. Ryota heard every rumor, but none heard as much as the truth echoing within him, he had been exposed, not defeated. His strength had collapsed the moment it was needed, revealing that his confidence had been built more on admiration than mastery. He had trained to impress, not to understand. He had perfected performance, not presence. And now he felt hollow, as if the identity he carried for years had been peeled away, leaving him vulnerable and painfully human. On the fourth day, unable to bear the silence of his room or the weight of the dojo's shame, Ryota fled to the outskirts of the city where the forests grew dense and the world grew quiet. He walked for hours, following no path, driven only by the hope that the stillness of nature might quiet the storm raging inside him. Eventually, exhausted, he reached a narrow stream winding through tall cedar trees. He knelt beside the water, seeing his reflection distorted by the ripples, eyes swollen, jaw bruised, pride shattered. He hardly recognized the face staring back. "Who am I, if not the warrior they believe me to be?" he whispered to the water. He expected no answer. But fate, or perhaps something more deliberate, had other plans. "You are someone who has yet to begin," a voice said calmly behind him. Ryota spun around, startled, hand instinctively reaching for the sword he hadn't brought. Standing beneath the trees was the Ronin who had defeated him, though standing hardly described it. The man seemed unbothered by the world, leaning casually against a trunk, arms folded, as if he had simply been waiting for Ryota to arrive. His presence carried no arrogance, no smugness, no triumph. Instead, he radiated a quiet strength that felt both unsettling and strangely comforting. "You followed me?" Ryota asked, his tone sharp. "No," the Ronin replied. "I simply walk where the wind moves, and today it moved here." Ryota clenched his fists, shame burning through him. "Why?" he demanded. "Why did you humiliate me like that?" The Ronin raised an eyebrow. "I didn't humiliate you. I revealed you." Those words hit harder than any strike he had delivered in the arena. Ryota wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but the truth weighed too heavy. He looked down at the stream again, unable to meet the Ronin's eyes. "You froze," the Ronin continued, stepping closer. "Not from fear of me, but from fear of them, their expectations, their praise, their belief that you were already complete. You trained to uphold an image, not to expand your spirit." Ryota swallowed hard. "Then what should I do now?" The Ronin crouched beside him, scooping a handful of water before letting it drip slowly through his fingers. "Walk alone," he said softly. "Until you are no longer defined by the voices around you. Until you can hear only your own." Ryota looked up, confusion and curiosity mixing inside him. "Walk alone, to become what?" The Ronin smiled, small, patient, knowing. "To become unstoppable." With that, he stood, turned, and began walking deeper into the forest, offering no explanation, no invitation, no promise of return. Ryota watched him disappear between the trees, his mind racing yet strangely clear. The path ahead was uncertain, difficult, and frightening. But it was his. For the first time in his life, he felt the beginning of something real. Ryota returned to the city that evening, but something inside him had fundamentally shifted. The streets were the same, the lanterns glowing softly above the rooftops, the aroma of grilled rice cakes drifting through the air, the chatter of merchants filling the night, but he no longer felt connected to the rhythm he once moved within. Every familiar detail seemed distant, as if he were seeing the world through a thin veil. He walked slowly through the marketplace, noticing how people looked at him not with admiration but uncertainty. They expected him to be broken, ashamed, desperate to reclaim their approval. Instead, he felt strangely calm. The Ronin's words echoed in his mind like the steady beat of a hidden drum, "Walk alone until you hear only your own voice." For the first time, he realized how crowded his mind had been, not with thoughts, but with expectations, with performances, with the constant need to be who others believed he was. He returned to his dojo long after sunset. The halls were silent, lit only by the soft glow of a single lantern left burning at the entrance. His master sat inside, waiting for him, posture straight despite his age. Ryota bowed deeply, expecting reprimand, perhaps even expulsion. But the old man only studied him for a long moment, his eyes neither harsh nor forgiving, just perceptive. "You disappeared," his master said quietly. "I needed to breathe," Ryota replied. The master nodded once, slowly. "And did you find air?" Ryota hesitated, then nodded. I found something, or someone. His master didn't ask who. Perhaps he already knew. Your defeat, he said, has become the only thing people speak of. I know. And what do you intend to do? Ryota took a deep breath. Leave. The word hung between them like a blade suspended by a single thread. His master's eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger. Leave, he repeated. Ryota straightened his back. I have been training to win battles I never understood. I have been trying to become the warrior others wanted, not the warrior I needed to be. I must start over. From nothing. From myself. Silence stretched across the room, heavy but not suffocating. The master looked at him with an expression Ryota had rarely seen, sadness mixed with pride. Most warriors spend their entire lives believing they are complete, the master said. Only the rare ones realize they are not. He stood, placing a hand on Ryota's shoulder. If you must walk alone, then walk with purpose. But remember, solitude is the hardest teacher. It offers no applause, no comfort, no audience. Only truth. I'm ready for that, Ryota said, though a tremor ran through him. He didn't know if it was fear or anticipation. His master stepped back and nodded. Then go. And return only when you have forged a voice that is truly yours. Ryota packed lightly, a simple travel robe, a bamboo water flask, a small pouch of coins, and a wooden practice sword. He left behind the ceremonial blades, the embroidered armor, the symbols of status he once took pride in. They belonged to the version of himself he was shedding. As he walked out of the dojo for the last time, he paused at the doorway, feeling the weight of years of discipline, pride, and illusion, resting behind him. He bowed deeply, one final gesture of gratitude to the place that had shaped him, before stepping into the night. The moon hung high, casting a pale glow across the quiet streets. Ryota looked ahead, unsure where the road would lead. But for the first time, uncertainty felt like freedom, not weakness. He began walking, no destination, no promise of victory, only the silent intention to discover the truth hidden beneath his own hesitation. And with each step away from the world he once knew, he felt the faint stirring of something new inside him, something unformed, raw, and quietly powerful. The first days of Ryota's journey were deceptively gentle. The roads leading out of Osaka wound through open fields and quiet farming villages, where life moved at its own unhurried rhythm. Children ran barefoot through the dust, chasing each other with wooden toys, old women tended to their gardens, farmers bowed respectfully as he passed. None of them recognized him. None of them whispered his name. None of them cared who he had been, or who he had failed to be. For a while, the anonymity was liberating. Ryota felt light without the weight of expectations he had carried for so long. And yet, late at night when the world grew silent, doubt crept into the spaces left by his fallen pride. He often found himself staring into the campfire, wondering whether leaving had been an act of courage, or a desperate escape disguised as one. On the seventh day, as he crossed through a dense bamboo forest, he encountered a group of wandering monks moving in single file along the narrow path. Their robes were simple, their steps slow but steady, their expressions serene. When he stepped aside to let them pass, their leader, a tall, weathered man with kind eyes, paused to study him. Ryota bowed awkwardly, unsure of the appropriate formality. You walk with burden in your spirit, the monk said, his voice soft yet unsettlingly perceptive. Ryota swallowed. I'm trying to leave it behind. Burden is not left behind, the monk replied. It is understood. Only then does it stop following. The word stung with truth he wasn't ready to confront. The monk smiled gently, as if sensing his discomfort, and continued down the path with the others. Ryota stood there long after they had disappeared, the echo of the monk's insight gnawing at his mind. He realized he had been walking forward physically, but spiritually he was circling the same wound, shame, confusion, insecurity. He didn't know how to understand it, let alone overcome it. That night, he camped beside a small clearing overlooking a valley. As the wind rustled through the bamboo and the stars flickered above him, Ryota decided he needed something he had avoided his whole life: silence. Not the silence of failure, but the silence of listening to himself without distraction, without pride, without fear. He sat cross-legged, breathing slowly, trying to steady the chaos within him. But instead of clarity, memories surged: his undefeated reputation, the cheers of spectators, the crushing humiliation of defeat, the Ronin's calm eyes watching him crumble. He clenched his fists, frustration burning through him. "Who am I supposed to become?" he whispered into the night. The only answer was the wind. The next morning, exhaustion weighed on him like armor. He continued walking, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was running from something he couldn't name. But fate has a way of confronting those who try to outrun themselves. By midday, he reached a narrow bridge crossing a swift river. Standing at the center was an elderly man practicing slow, deliberate sword movements so fluid they seemed almost like a dance. Ryota stopped, mesmerized. There was no strength in the old man's strikes, no intensity, no aggression, just pure presence. When the man finished, he turned toward Ryota with a gentle smile. "You watch with curiosity," he said. "Your form," Ryota hesitated, unsure how to compliment something he didn't fully understand. "It's different from anything I've seen." "That's because it isn't a form," the old man said. "It's truth." Ryota blinked, confused. "Truth?" The old man nodded. "Technique is learned. Truth is earned. A warrior who does not know himself cannot know his blade." Ryota's breath caught. The word struck a hidden nerve. "Teach me," he said without thinking. The old man studied him for a long, thoughtful moment. "Not yet," he said. "You must first walk far enough that you meet what you've been avoiding." Ryota opened his mouth to ask what that meant, but the old man turned away, resuming his slow, graceful movements. It was clear the conversation was over. Ryota crossed the bridge and continued down the path, unsettled but strangely awakened. The road ahead suddenly felt heavier, darker, more real. For the first time, he understood that solitude wasn't simply walking away from the world, it was walking toward the deepest parts of himself. And that journey had only just begun. As Ryota ventured deeper into the mountains, the terrain grew more unforgiving. The gentle paths of the lower valleys gave way to steep, uneven trails littered with loose stones that threatened to slide beneath his feet. The air grew colder, thinner, sharper, each breath cutting through his lungs like icy steel. Nights became harsher too, the warmth of civilization replaced by the distant howl of wolves and the relentless whisper of the wind threading through jagged cliffs. Yet Ryota pressed on, driven not by destination but by a growing, unspoken understanding. The further he walked from the world he once knew, the closer he came to confronting the truth the Ronin had spoken of. By the 12th night, he found shelter under an overhanging rock. His body ached from constant travel, his hands blistered, and his once steady gait had become stiff with fatigue. He lit a small fire using dry twigs he had collected earlier, watching the flames flicker as though struggling to survive the cold. He wrapped his robe tightly around himself, but the chill seeped through anyway. Still, it wasn't the cold that unsettled him, it was the silence. Not the peaceful, meditative silence he had hoped for, but the kind that forced every suppressed thought to crawl to the surface. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his breath. Instead, he found himself replaying the moment of his defeat, the crack of the wooden sword, the shock freezing his limbs, the expressions of the crowd. But behind those memories lay something deeper, something he had been avoiding for years. It came slowly, like a wound reopening, the memory of his father. He had been 6 years old when his father first placed a wooden sword in his hands. While other children played freely in the fields, Ryota spent his days practicing stances and footwork, driven by the belief that perfection was the only form of love his father understood. Whenever he faltered, even slightly, his father's disappointment cut sharper than any blade. Ryota had once thought this pursuit noble, discipline, honor, tradition. But now, alone in the mountains, he realized that much of his identity had not been built by his own will. It had been shaped by the pressure to be worthy of someone else's pride. Ryota's chest tightened. The fire crackled softly, as if listening. He whispered into the flames, "Was I ever doing this for myself?" The question hung in the cold air like frost. For years he had trained, fought, and excelled, not because he loved the art of the sword, but because he feared the emptiness that came when he wasn't perfect. His entire life had been an attempt to outrun inadequacy. The Ronin's words now took on a new weight. "You are someone who has yet to begin." Ryota leaned back against the rock wall, exhaling shakily. "Then what have I been living for?" he asked the night, though he knew no answer would come. As dawn crept over the horizon, he forced himself to rise and continue climbing. His legs trembled from exhaustion, but something inside him, something small yet stubborn, pushed him onward. By midday, he reached a narrow ridge overlooking a vast expanse of mist-covered mountains. The sight stole his breath. It was terrifying in its enormity, beautiful in its indifference. Here, the world didn't care about his victories or failures. It didn't care about titles, reputations, or the expectations of others. It existed, simply and powerfully, without needing to prove anything. And suddenly, Ryota realized why solitude was necessary. Only in a place where the world demanded nothing could he finally ask himself what he wanted. A gust of wind swept across the ridge, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Ryota closed his eyes and let the cold wash over him, grounding him, sharpening him, reminding him he was still alive. When he opened his eyes again, he whispered, "I want to begin." For the first time, the words didn't feel like hope. They felt like truth. The days that followed carved Ryota into someone he barely recognized. As he climbed higher into the mountains, the world around him shifted into something harsher, more primal. Gone were the soft bamboo forests and gentle streams. Here, the terrain was unforgiving, jagged cliffs, narrow ledges, and winds so fierce they seemed intent on pushing him back down the path he had come. But Ryota pushed forward, step by deliberate step, as though the mountain itself were testing his resolve. Each day stripped something away from him, comfort, pride, illusions, and with each loss, he felt a strange, subtle strengthening inside, as though he were being reshaped from within. On the 17th day, a storm descended without warning. Black clouds rolled across the sky, swallowing the sun in minutes. Rain fell in violent sheets, and thunder cracked through the air like the roar of ancient gods. Ryota staggered through the downpour, his robe soaked, his hair plastered to his face. The trail beneath him turned slippery, forcing him to crouch low to avoid being thrown off balance. Lightning illuminated the jagged peaks around him, revealing how small he was in the vastness of nature. Finally, he found shelter beneath an outcropping of rock, barely large enough to crawl under, but enough to shield him from the worst of the storm. He sat with his back against the stone, knees pulled to his chest, shivering as the rain hammered the world outside. It would have been easy to feel fear in that moment. Easy to feel loneliness. Easy to feel regret. But instead, Ryota felt something entirely unexpected, clarity. The storm outside mirrored the storm he had carried within himself for years. The chaos, the pressure, the fear of falling, the constant need to hold everything together, it was all reflected in the violent sky. He watched the lightning crack in the distance and felt something tighten inside him, not out of fear but understanding. Strength wasn't earned in comfort. It wasn't shaped in applause. It wasn't found in victories won under the eyes of the cheering crowd. True strength was forged in the places where no one was watching, in the storms, in the silence, in the moments when the world stripped you bare and left you with nothing but the truth of who you were. Ryota closed his eyes and let the sound of the storm wash over him. The rain fell so heavily that it drowned out his thoughts, leaving only presence. Only breath. Only now. For the first time in his life, he wasn't rehearsing the future or reliving the past. He wasn't thinking about failure or success. He wasn't imagining the eyes of others on him. He was simply existing, raw, vulnerable, real. The storm raged through the night. Ryota didn't sleep, but he didn't need to. Something inside him was being reshaped, like metal heated and hammered into new form. When dawn finally broke, bringing a muted, silver light to the mountains, the storm had passed. The world looked clean, washed, renewed. And so did he. He stepped out from beneath the rock, his clothes still damp but his spirit strangely light. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Clouds drifted lazily through the valleys below, as if the world had softened overnight. Ryota's legs trembled from exhaustion, but there was a steadiness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. As he resumed his climb, he realized something profound: the road ahead would not get easier. He would face more storms, more doubt, more moments of fear. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the difficulty. Hardship no longer felt like an enemy, it felt like a teacher. And as he walked, he whispered not as a question but as a vow, "I will not turn back." The mountains did not respond, but the silence felt like acknowledgement. By the 20th day, Ryota reached a remote plateau where the world seemed suspended between earth and sky. The air was thin enough to sting his lungs, and the cold bit at his skin even under the midday sun. Yet there was a stillness here, a vast, echoing quiet that felt ancient, as though countless wanderers before him had come to this place seeking something only silence could reveal. Ryota set down his small pack, taking in the sweeping view of valleys stretched like painted scrolls beneath him. For a moment, he simply stood there, feeling the wind brush against his face, neither harsh nor gentle, just honest. He exhaled slowly. The storm had stripped him, but this silence examined him. A small shrine sat at the far edge of the plateau, weathered by time and storms, built from rough stones stacked with bare hands. There was no statue, no offering bowls, no markers of any particular deity. Only a single wooden plaque carved with a simple phrase, "Know the self, or the world will shape it for you." Ryota felt those words settle into him like stones dropping into deep water. It was a truth he had spent years running from. He knelt before the shrine, not in prayer but in reflection. And as he closed his eyes, memories rose, not the sharp, painful ones of failure, but softer ones he had forgotten. Moments of quiet joy from his childhood, the feel of morning dew on his feet, the thrill of leaping across streams, the warmth of sunlight filtering through leaves while he trained alone in secret, not to impress but because something inside him loved movement, loved the rhythm of breath and blade. These memories surprised him. He had buried them beneath layers of ambition, expectation, discipline. But here, in the quiet, they returned without judgment. For so long, he whispered, I thought strength meant being what others needed me to be. The wind carried his words away, but he continued. I forgot what I wanted. A flicker of warmth stirred in his chest, not confidence, not yet, but recognition. A rediscovery of a voice he had silenced long ago. He opened his eyes and stood, feeling a new steadiness in the way his feet touched the earth. As he stepped beyond the shrine, he noticed fresh footprints in the dirt, light, deliberate, moving toward a narrow trail carved into the cliffs. His heart tightened. The pattern looked familiar. The Ronin had passed through here. Recently. For the first time since their brief encounter in the forest, Ryota felt a clear pull, not of dependence or desperation, but of purpose. Not to seek validation, but understanding. Not to learn from the Ronin's strength, but from what his presence had awakened inside him. I'm not running anymore, Ryota murmured. He tightened the strap of his pack and followed the footprints into the mountains, not because he needed someone to show him the path, but because he was finally ready to walk it for himself. The trail leading from the plateau wound sharply along the side of the mountain, narrowing until it became little more than a ledge carved by time and wind. The footprints Ryota followed grew faint, as if the Ronin had deliberately softened his presence, leaving only enough trace for someone who truly sought him, not out of admiration, but intention. Ryota moved carefully, each step measured, the silence around him so vast that even the sound of his breathing felt loud. The mountain air tasted colder here, purer, as though the world above the clouds demanded honesty simply to exist within it. Hours passed before the trail widened, opening into a hidden valley tucked between towering cliffs. The valley floor was covered in soft grass that swayed with the faintest breeze, and in the center stood a small wooden hut, unassuming, worn, but radiating a sort of quiet strength that felt familiar. Smoke rose gently from its chimney. Ryota hesitated at the edge of the clearing, sensing that this place wasn't meant to be stumbled into by accident. It was a refuge for someone who had long walked the path he had only just begun. He took a slow breath and approached. Before he could reach the doorway, the Ronin stepped out, as though he had known Ryota would arrive on this exact day, at this exact hour. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, those calm, unsettling eyes, held a depth that made Ryota straighten instinctively. "You found the path," the Ronin said. "I followed the truth," Ryota replied, surprised by his own words. The Ronin studied him for a long moment. There was no praise in his gaze, no acknowledgement of effort, only evaluation, as if measuring how much of the old Ryota remained. Finally, he nodded toward a flat stone near the hut. "Sit." Ryota obeyed without protest. The Ronin sat across from him, the grass shifting beneath their weight. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it felt purposeful, like a lesson in itself. "You've shed much," the Ronin said at last. "But what remains?" Ryota searched for an answer. The mountains had stripped him, the storm had broken him open, and the journey had forced him to confront pieces of himself he had spent years ignoring. But what truly remained? "Not strength," Ryota said slowly. "Not certainty. Only, willingness." The Ronin's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but recognition. "Good. A sword cannot be sharpened if it believes itself already flawless." Ryota lowered his gaze. "Then, will you train me?" The Ronin shook his head. "Training begins when you no longer ask for it. When your steps, your breath, your choices move toward truth without permission." Ryota felt the words settle inside him like embers. He wasn't being rejected, he was being challenged. "Then what should I do now?" he asked. The Ronin stood and pointed toward the valley beyond the cliffs. "Live here. Work. Breathe. Move. Until the world stops shaping you, and you begin shaping yourself." Ryota looked at the valley, then back at the Ronin. For the first time, he felt not lost, but exactly where he needed to be. Ryota accepted the Ronin's instructions without question, though a quiet uncertainty stirred inside him as he watched the older warrior retreat into the hut, leaving him alone in the vast, silent valley. The air felt different here, still, undisturbed, untouched by human ambition or noise. For the first time in years, Ryota realized there was no one to impress, no eyes watching, no expectations pressing down on his shoulders. There was only himself, stripped of every title, every failure, every illusion. And it was in that raw simplicity that his true training finally began. He explored the valley slowly, letting the ground guide his steps. A stream ran alongside a cluster of tall pines, its water cold and clear enough to mirror the sky. Ryota knelt, cupped it in his hands, and drank. The coldness shocked him fully awake, as if reminding him that life, at its core, was this, pure, unfiltered, immediate. Nearby, stones lay scattered along the water's edge, perfect for lifting, turning, or stacking, simple tasks that demanded presence instead of perfection. Without needing instructions, Ryota began gathering them, building a small cairn, one stone at a time. The work was repetitive, almost meditative, yet it grounded him in a way sword practice never had. As the sun shifted across the sky, he moved through the valley, letting instinct guide each action. When branches needed clearing, he cleared them. When fallen timber blocked the water's flow, he moved it aside. When the grass grew too thick near the hut, he trimmed it. Every task, no matter how small, tethered him to the moment, no thought of achievement, no fear of failure, no desire for recognition. just doing. By evening, sweat clung to his skin, and his muscles ached, not with the sharp tension of performance, but with the honest fatigue of genuine labor. He returned to the hut expecting the Ronin to appear, to inspect his work, to offer correction or approval. But the Ronin remained inside, silent, as though testing whether Ryota's actions were for himself or for an audience that no longer existed. Ryota sat on the grass, watching the last rays of sunlight sink behind the cliffs. A strange calmness washed over him, not happiness, not pride, but an inner quiet he hadn't felt since childhood. He listened to the valley breathe, the wind moving gently through the pines, the distant call of a night bird, the steady flow of the stream. It was in this stillness that the realization dawned on him: mastery wasn't forged through intensity, but through alignment. Through living in a way that each action, each breath, brought him closer to who he was becoming. When darkness finally settled, the Ronin emerged at last. He walked toward Ryota and stopped beside him, eyes scanning the valley but offering no judgment. "You worked," the Ronin said simply. "Yes," Ryota replied. "Because you chose to work, or because you thought I expected it?" Ryota considered the question, then answered honestly. "I worked because the valley needed it. And because I needed it." The Ronin nodded. "Good. A warrior who moves only when watched will collapse the moment he stands alone. But one who moves from inner alignment cannot be broken." They stood in silence for a moment before the Ronin continued, "Tomorrow, you will train in the old way, not with forms, not with combat, but with life. The valley will teach you more than any sword master could." Ryota felt something shift inside him, a subtle but unmistakable click of understanding. His journey had ceased to be about redemption or reclaiming lost honor. It had become something deeper, the reconstruction of a self no longer tied to victory or defeat, but to presence, truth, and unwavering inner strength. He bowed his head. "I'm ready." The Ronin's expression remained calm, unreadable. "No. But you're becoming ready, and that is enough." The next morning, Ryota awoke before the sun, though he wasn't entirely sure he had ever truly slept. The valley seemed to hum with its own quiet energy, as if it had been waiting for him to rise. Soft mist curled along the ground, weaving through the grass and stones like drifting spirits. For a moment, Ryota simply stood still, letting the cool air settle against his skin, listening to the faint heartbeat of nature around him. There was no urgency, no rushing, no command shouted from a master. The day invited him, not with pressure, but with possibility. The Ronin appeared at the hut's doorway, his presence as effortless as the morning wind. "Today," he said, "you will learn by moving without purpose, but not without awareness." Ryota didn't fully understand, but he nodded. Understanding, he was beginning to realize, often came after the doing, not before. The Ronin walked with him through the valley, yet offered no instructions. Instead, he simply observed, letting Ryota explore the world with new eyes. Ryota touched the bark of the trees, feeling the rough patterns beneath his fingers. He stepped through the shallow stream, the water swirling around his ankles, reminding him to move with care rather than force. He lifted stones and set them down again, noticing how weight shifted through his legs and spine. The tasks were simple, almost meaningless in a practical sense, but each carried a small lesson: balance, breath, patience, attention. Hours drifted by without either of them speaking. In that silence, Ryota's mind began to rearrange itself. Thoughts that once felt heavy loosened their grip. Doubts that had chased him for years fell quiet. He found himself paying attention to the tiny details he used to overlook: the way light flickered on a blade of grass, the distant rhythm of dripping water, the subtle shift in the wind before it changed direction. Awareness, he discovered, was not a skill, it was a way of being. When the sun reached its highest point, the Ronin finally broke the silence. "You seek greatness," he said. "But greatness does not come from force. It comes from presence. A warrior who is not here, truly here, cannot strike with clarity or stand with purpose." Ryota listened, feeling the truth settle deep inside him. You walk alone, the Ronin continued, not because the world abandoned you, but because the path you're choosing cannot be shared. Others may walk beside you for moments, but the transformation you seek is yours alone. That is the price of becoming unstoppable. Ryota looked out across the valley, and for the first time he didn't feel small within its vastness. Instead, he felt grounded, connected, part of something larger than fear or ambition. The Ronin's voice softened. Keep walking. Not to reach a destination, but to become worthy of the steps themselves. Ryota exhaled slowly. No rush. No panic. No doubt. He stepped forward. And this time, the earth seemed to move with him.